Hi everyone, welcome to episode 12 of the Spark podcast. My name is Jack, I'll be your host, and today we're going to talk about cannabis. Cannabis is a derivative from the cannabis plant. It's a drug that people use. It's also referred to as marijuana, reefer, weed. There's dope in some places, although that name is kind of lost its fashion over the years. This is a big topic and we've got a lot to cover. I'm not too sure how long this is going to go on for, but obviously you've clicked into this, so you've seen the time, and that's how long it's going to take. I think I've covered most of the areas in this. I don't go into like the different strains of like sativas versus indicas, because that's all very subjective. That's not actually a scientific thing. It's just the way that they make you feel. I was trying to get a bit more, I suppose, scientific about it. There are some subjective things in this, don't get me wrong. A lot of people, my sources are pretty obviously biased, but we don't know enough about this to say that they're wrong. So I'll just get started and move straight into it. Cannabis is, as I said, is derived from the cannabis plant called Cannabis sativa. It grows wild in many of the tropical and temperate areas of the world, but it can be grown in pretty much any climate now that people have started to use indoor hydroponic technology. It's a very common way to grow marijuana to grow cannabis in California, where arguably the best marijuana comes from, I hear. I don't know, I've never even seen Californian marijuana, but you know, apparently it's the best. The main active ingredient in cannabis is called delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, also tetrahydrocannabinol, also known as THC, and I'm going to call it that because tetrahydrocannabinol is difficult to say, and THC is way easier. THC is the part of the plant that gives you the high. There's a wide range of THC potency between cannabis products. Like you could get a gummy bear that'll blow your fucking mind, just blast you into another dimension, or you could smoke a whole joint and feel nothing. It varies wildly with THC content. Cannabis is used in three main forms: marijuana, hashish, and hash oil. Marijuana is made from dried flowers and leaves of the cannabis plant. It is the least potent of all the cannabis products and is usually smoked or made into edible products like cookies or brownies. Hashish is made from a resin from the cannabis plant. It's kind of a secreted gum. It is dried and pressed into small blocks and smoked. It can also be added to food and eaten. Hash oil, the most potent of cannabis product, is a thick oil obtained from hashish. It is also smoked. So in orders of most processed, you have marijuana, hash, and hashish. Cannabis is usually smoked in hand-rolled cigarettes, known as joints, or in several water pipes, bongs. These pipes or bongs can be bought or made from things such as orange juice containers or soft drink cans or even toilet rolls. People make them out of water bottles all the time. You can just make a bong out of pretty much anything as long as you've got water and some sort of material to make it out of. Stoners are ingenuitive. Ingenuitive? Is that a word? Stoners have ingenuity. They can make a bong or a pipe out of anything. In Ireland, cannabis is the most commonly used illegal drug, with lifetime usage of 24%. Among people who used cannabis in the last year, 24.3% are classified as cannabis dependent. Cannabis dependence is higher in males who use in the last year than in females, 26.8% in males versus 16.7% in females. Among people who used cannabis in the last year, 32% meet the criteria for cannabis abuse. Rates of cannabis abuse are higher among males, which is 33.9%, than they are among females, which is 26.5%. 4%. Most respondents, 74.5% of them, agree that people should be permitted to take cannabis for medical reasons. Males are more likely to agree with the statement than females. Older adults are more likely to agree than young adults, which kind of surprised me. And over 65s. So people who agree are older adults at 78.4%, young adults 73.9%, and over 65s, which is only 64.2%. This is a sizable increase when compared to the 2010 to 2011 survey. All these numbers come from September 2018. Sorry, I didn't mention that. But in 2010-2011, only 65.8% of people agreed that medical use of marijuana should be something that's happening. However, the majority disagree with recreational use of cannabis, which is now at 66.4%. It was at 69.2%, so they're making progress. And the vast majority of people, 74.3%, disapprove of people smoking cannabis occasionally. There are a number of reasons for that. It causes a lot of problems. I couldn't get any research studies done in Ireland for this, for pretty obvious reasons, because we just don't deal with marijuana at all. But in America, they do. It's been medically legal there since, I think, 95. So, and it's now recreationally legal in most states. I'm not sure exactly which ones. The DSM-5, which is the newest edition of the American Psychiatric Association's Manual for Diagnosing Mental Health and Substance Disorders, now includes diagnosis of cannabis/marijuana use disorder, including a group of symptoms and diagnostic criteria for addiction, such as tolerance, withdrawal syndrome, craving, and persistent or unsuccessful attempts to cut down or control use of the drug. Jesus, that water didn't really do anything for me at all. Throat's so dry. Anyway, in many Western nations, its use is so widespread that more than half of 21-year-olds born since 1970 have reported trying the drug at least once. In recent years, studies have discovered the following about the prevalence of marijuana addiction. More adults in the US had a marijuana use disorder in 2001 than they did in 1991. Increases in the prevalence of marijuana dependence have been most notable among young black men and women, and among Latino adult men. There have been significant increases in the abuse of and dependence on marijuana by 45 to 64-year-old men. The increase in potency of the active ingredient in marijuana, THC, may have contributed to the rising rates in problematic use. Prevalence of marijuana use by white males aged between 18 to 29 has not increased, but they have remained high. Numerous environmental factors like increase in single-parent households, education, truancy, and economic factors are all likely to contribute to observed changes. So this kind of report has stated that more people are using marijuana, and it's causing more problems in social situations. Marijuana use in adolescence is also associated with altered brain development. It leads to a decline in cognitive function and poor academic performance. Adolescents who use marijuana perform worse on tests of problem solving, with problems also in areas of attention, memory, and learning. After 28 days abstinence from marijuana use, there was still diminished performance in areas of complex attention, verbal memory, and planning in some studies. It is also thought that cannabis use in susceptible adolescents and young adults may lead to disorders like schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders, which makes sense. It fucks with your brain, and young people are susceptible to everything. You gotta think, when you were 13 or 14. Just as a guy, I don't know what it's like for women, but I imagine it's the same crazy fucking world. You don't know what's going on, but when you're a guy, you're mental. You're just full of testosterone. You don't know what you're doing, and then you have this drug that like turns it off for a second and maybe turns it back on again a bit harder, and everyone reacts a little bit differently to it. But I don't think it's good to smoke weed, at least until you're in your mid-20s. Before then, it does fuck with your brain. I know a lot of people who have had bad effects from it. Marijuana and alcohol are frequently used together, with 58% of adolescents who drink also using marijuana. Marijuana affects perception and judgment and is associated with low achievement. You'll always hear or see the image depicted of the lazy stoner. Marijuana also causes memory and learning problems, which can especially affect those in high school or college. Obviously, you don't want to be forgetting everything you've learned that day. It can also cause delinquent behavior, aggression, rebellion, and poor relationships with family, especially parents. According to the social impact of drug abuse, which is the report, the effects of drugs in the workplace depend on the specific tasks being performed. Highly technical tasks that require concentration and memory are more likely to be affected by drug use than manual labor, which is kind of obvious when you think about it. But I suppose it had to be said. There's some facts about mental health and marijuana. Marijuana use can cause severe anxiety and even panic attacks, especially among inexperienced users of the drug who take a relatively large dose. We all know people who got way too high at their first time and just panicked and had an awful experience. You can laugh at it, but it is terrifying, and you think you're gonna die, and like, no one has ever died from marijuana, but you're like, I could be the one, I could be the first one. Paranoia leads into that a lot. Marijuana slows reaction time and information processing, signal detection and motor coordination, a condition which intensifies as dose increases. It might be okay if you're hanging around at home, but accidental injury or fatality while driving has become a major health concern around how marijuana affects mental processing. So don't drive while high. Stupid. Duh. It's a terrible thing. Don't do it. Don't drive while impaired in any way, shape or form at all. Keep your eye on the road. Pay attention to what you're doing. People die on roads every day. And besides, the guards now have tests for people who are high on drugs. I'm not entirely sure what those tests entail, because I haven't been pulled over. Because I drive responsibly and I don't go through roundabouts like some people I know. But they are testing for it, so don't drive while high. Not because you can get caught, but because you can seriously fuck yourself up, or other people. I don't like, if you drive while high or drunk and you fuck yourself up, that's your own fault. But if you kill someone else, then like, you're a dickhead. There's no two ways about it. Marijuana use is associated with psychotic illness, as I was saying before, schizophrenia and other things like that, in vulnerable adolescents, such as those exposed to child abuse and family history of psychotic illness. And you see, kind of tragically enough, that people who are abused or have horrible childhoods kind of turn to drugs later on in life, and it doesn't really make things better. Now that may be kind of a correlation rather than a cause and effect thing, but it just happens a lot. There is a clinically significant relationship between reductions of marijuana use and reduction in depression among young women ages 18 to 25. Depression is the most common mental illness for young adults, particularly for young women, And depressive symptoms were reduced in young women who reduced their use of cannabis or marijuana. So you may think it makes you happy all the time, but if that's the only thing you're doing, then you're not going to be happy. I think Randy Marsh from South Park put it the best way ever. I think he catch his son smoking or something like that, but he kind of put it in the way that what he said was, marijuana is fun, but it makes being bored seem like something that's acceptable to do. And if you have nothing to do all day, all the time, you're not bettering yourself. You're not going out and finding a hobby you enjoy or a fucking job or anything like that. If you're just doing nothing but smoking weed all the time, you might be okay with that. But for how long? It's okay for maybe a week or two, but if that's your whole life, then you're not going to be happy about it. You need something to do. At least I do anyway. I'd be fucking crazy if I didn't have a job and this to keep me going, and books and video games, and I just gotta keep my mind ticking over. I'm like a shark. Now, marijuana isn't all bad. There are a lot of benefits to it, and I didn't list all of them. There's a lot of things that we don't know about marijuana. Limitations on marijuana research mean we still have big questions about its medicinal properties. Medicinal is better. Medicinal properties. In addition to CBD, cannabidiol, which is kind of the calming chemical in THC, in marijuana. In addition to cannabidiol and THC, CBD for cannabidiol, there are another 400 or so chemical compounds, more of 60 of which are cannabinoids. Many of these could have medical uses, but without more research, we won't know how to best make use of those compounds. A recent report by the National Academies of Scientists, Engineering and Medicine said there was definitive evidence that cannabis or cannabinoids can be an effective treatment for chronic pain. The report said that this is by far the most common reason people request medical marijuana, for chronic pain. That's maybe why marijuana is often called chronic as well. My voice is fucked today. I don't know what I've been doing last night. I was probably just screaming in my sleep again. I don't do that, I don't think. I hope I don't anyway. The same report said that there's equally strong evidence marijuana can help with muscle spasms related to multiple sclerosis. Other types of muscle spasms respond to marijuana as well. People use medical marijuana to treat diaphragm spasms that are untreatable by other prescribed medications. So for some illnesses, marijuana is the only option. There's a fair amount of evidence that marijuana does no harm to the lungs. Not paradoxically. What's the word I'm thinking of? Surprisingly? It's not surprisingly. It's like anti-logical. I know, it's surprising. There's a fair amount of evidence that marijuana does no harm to the lungs, unless you also smoke it with tobacco. Tobacco will fuck up your lungs. One study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that not only does marijuana not impair lung function, it may actually even increase lung capacity. Researchers looking for risk factors of heart disease tested the lung function of 5,115 young adults over the course of 20 years. Tobacco smokers lost lung function over time, but pot users actually showed an increase in lung capacity. It's possible that the increased lung capacity may be due to taking deep breaths while inhaling the drug, and not as a therapeutic chemical in the drug. It's not magic. The smokers in the study only toked up a few times a month, but a more recent survey of people who smoked pot daily for up to 20 years found no evidence that smoking pot harmed their lungs either. The National Academy's report said that there are good studies showing marijuana use are not more likely to have marijuana users are not more likely to have cancers associated with smoking than people who don't smoke at all. One of the most common reasons that states in America allow medical marijuana use is to treat and prevent the eye disease glaucoma, which increases pressure on the eyeball and damages your optic nerve and causes loss of vision. I think you can go blind from it. I'm not too sure. This podcast isn't about glaucoma. I know it's bad. I gotta stop hitting my mic. Marijuana decreases the pressure inside the eye. According to the National Eye Institute, studies in the early 1970s showed that marijuana, when smoked, lowered intraocular pressure, IOP, in people with normal pressure and those with glaucoma. For now, the medical consensus is that marijuana only lowers IOP for a few hours, meaning there's not good evidence for it as a long-term treatment right now. Researchers hope that perhaps a marijuana-based compound could be developed that lasts a bit longer and decreases the pressure for a longer time. Some studies have shown that cannabidiol, CBD, that I was talking about earlier, seems to help people with treatment-resistant epilepsy. A number of individuals have reported that marijuana is the only thing that helps control their children's seizures. However, there haven't been any gold standard double-blind studies on the topic, so researchers say more data is needed before we know how effective marijuana is. And this is kind of a running theme throughout all of my research of marijuana. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and to me that's red flags going up. That maybe people are just saying that so they can smoke weed and get high, but I have heard I've read a lot of reports of people who want to study it in university getting like the marijuana they get is like either low grade dog shit, or they get like a tiny amount. There's not enough to actually do full scale tests on, and people aren't funding it because it's like seen as drugs. Why would we test drugs? Because they could help us. So a lot of the anecdotal evidence is anecdotal because people haven't done research on it yet, because it's taboo, I suppose. CBD, which is also actually available in Ireland as a little you get a vial of it. It's very good for anxiety, I hear. Helps calm you down. CBD is the calming agent in marijuana that helps you relax. It may prevent cancer from spreading, is what I've read. Researchers at the California Pacific Medical Center in San Francisco reported that in 2007. Other preliminary studies on aggressive brain tumors in mice or cell cultures have shown that THC and CBD can slow or shrink tumors at the right dose, which is a strong reason to do more research. One 2014 study found that marijuana can significantly slow the growth of the type of brain tumor associated with 80% of malignant brain cancer in people. Still, these findings are in cell cultures and animals, and don't necessarily mean the effect will translate to people. Far more investigation is needed. This leads back to the animal testing things. Like things take time to work through. So if we've only started to study these properties of marijuana, THC, and CBD now. So it's going to be another 30 or 40 years before we actually see the effects of them on humans. And at affordable prices, I suppose. Oh, I've been talking a lot. We're 25 minutes in, and I'm about halfway through. This is going to be a long, long podcast. Researchers know that many cannabis users consume marijuana to relax, but also that many people say smoking too much may cause anxiety, which is definitely true. So scientists conducted a study to find the Goldilocks zone, the right amount for marijuana to calm people. According to Emma Childs, an associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and an author of the study, we found that THC at low doses reduced stress, while higher doses had the opposite effect. A few puffs was enough to help study participants to relax, but a few puffs more started to amp up anxiety. However, people may react differently in different situations, so everyone's got their own tolerance. This use for marijuana is probably one of my favorite ones because Alzheimer's scares the shit out of me. Marijuana may be able to slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease. A study led by Kim Janda of the Scripps Research Institute, the 2006 study published in the journal Molecular Pharmaceutics found that THC slows the formation of amyloid plaques by blocking the enzyme in the brain that makes them. These plaques kill brain cells and are associated with Alzheimer's. A synthetic mixture of CBD and THC seems to preserve memory in a mouse model of Alzheimer's disease. Another study suggested that a THC-based prescription drug called dronabinol was able to reduce behavioral disturbances in dementia patients. And those are two things that scare the fuck out of me. Dementia and Alzheimer's, I just don't want them at all. If I start to go a bit loopy, just shoot me. Just done. All these studies are in very early stages, though. So a lot more research is needed. That's a running theme, too, where more research is needed. I'm going to run out of water soon. Right. Marijuana can ease painful symptoms of multiple sclerosis, as I was saying earlier, according to a study published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal. Jodie Corey Bloom studied 30 multiple sclerosis patients with painful contractions in their muscles. These patients didn't respond to other treatments, but after smoking marijuana for a few days, they reported that they were in less pain. The THC in marijuana seems to bind to receptors in the nerves and muscles to relieve pain. So that's a good thing. Multiple sclerosis is also an awful disease. Treatment for hepatitis C treatment for hepatitis C infection is harsh. Negative side effects include fatigue, nausea, muscle aches, loss of appetite, and depression. Those side effects can last for months and lead many people to stop their treatment early. They just can't deal with it anymore. But a 2006 study in the European Journal of Gastroenterology and Hepatology found that 86% of patients using marijuana successfully completed their Hep C therapy. Only 29% of non-smokers completed their treatment, possibly because the marijuana helps lessen the treatment side effects. Marijuana also seems to improve the treatment's effectiveness. 54% of Hep C patients smoking marijuana got their viral levels low and kept them low, in comparison to only 8% of non-smokers. I've said marijuana so much now that it's starting to lose all meaning. It's just a word now. I'm just going to say pot or cannabis. Cannabis. Yeah, cannabis sounds good. Research from the University of Nottingham shows that cannabis may help protect the brain from damage from a stroke by reducing the size of the area affected by the stroke, at least in rats, mice, and monkeys. As I said, animal testing, it's going to take a while before we get to humans. This is the only research that has shown neuroprotective effects of cannabis. Some research shows that the plant may help protect the brain after other types of brain trauma. No, that's just a suggestion. There's no evidence to back that up. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Lester Grinspoon, a professor of psychiatry at Harvard and a marijuana advocate, recently wrote an open letter to NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell. In it, he said the NFL should stop testing players for marijuana and the league should start funding research into the plant's ability to protect the brain instead. He said, already many doctors and researchers believe that marijuana has incredibly powerful neuroprotective properties, an understanding based on both laboratory and clinical data, Grinspoon wrote. Goodell said he'd consider permitting athletes to use marijuana if medical research shows that it's an effective neuroprotective agent. At least one recent study on the topic found that patients who had used marijuana were less likely to die from traumatic brain injuries. So this goes along with the whole, I don't want to say the concussion scandal, because it's something that's been happening ever since humans existed and sports began. If you hit your head, you're likely to get a concussion. I've gotten a few concussions over the years. I didn't know I had them at the time, but now I'm looking back and I'm going, that was definitely a concussion. They're not good. They're not fun. You feel bad and everything feels awful. But if you can reduce that happening, if you can reduce the damage it does, that's a good thing in my book, regardless of all the other things that I've listed. If we can reduce concussion damage and brain damage, perfect. The list of the benefits of marijuana that I found just goes on and 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 on. But I think one of the most prevalent ones is the use of marijuana for people going through chemotherapy. There's good evidence that it's effective for this, according to the National Academies report. Cancer patients being treated with chemo suffer from painful nausea, vomiting, and loss of appetite. This can cause additional health complications. Marijuana can help reduce these side effects, alleviating pain, decreasing nausea, and stimulating the appetite. There are also multiple FDA-approved cannabinoid drugs that use THC for the same purpose. Now, if you've all heard of the munchies, people get the munchies when they're high on marijuana or cannabis. I just went straight back to saying marijuana again. Again, it's just, it means something now again. But yeah, if you can eat, tuck up a little, and you're going to be eating for the rest of your days. It's just, you can't stop after a while. Now, that's all well and good, the benefits of marijuana, but there is a coevolution of humans and the cannabis plant. The cannabis plant cannot live without human interaction. Did you know that? Because we cultivate the female part of the plant, but it also needs a male part. They don't mix themselves. Humans have to do it. So marijuana has developed along with humans. There was a nice little article about this, very biased towards marijuana, so I'll warn you of that before we go into it, but I thought it was very interesting. And I've also heard it in different, from different sources. This was just like the most comprehensive one I could find. We now know that the reason that cannabis is so miraculously able to address so many different human ailments, as I said before, and provides so many useful applications as hemp, is because it actually evolved with us over time in a process called coevolution. I didn't even mention hemp. Hemp is amazing. Hemp is like a new super material that people haven't used at all. I'm not sure if this has stopped recording or if it's still recording. My screen just went blank. Oh, it's still recording. That's fine. That's never happened before. I've never talked for more than half an hour, and my monitor is set to turn off after half an hour. Okay, I'm going to move my mouse intermittently as time goes on. But hemp is amazing. Apparently there's like plastic substitutes that you can make out of hemp. Ropes are made out of hemp. It's all natural stuff that degrades normally. Much better than plastics. Plastics are awful, awful things. Don't get me wrong, handy, great, easy to make stuff out of, but last forever. And if you ever go to a landfill, it's mostly plastic. It's awful. No. But hemp is good. I like hemp. It's strong too. Where was I? According to Michael Pollan, it's a very very apt name, Michael Pollan, the New York Times best-selling author of The Botany of Desire. Cannabis has been so changed by its 15,000 years of coevolution with us that a wild version of the plant simply does not exist anymore. According to Pollan, cannabis found a way to produce chemicals that give us pleasure, like THC, thereby seducing us into cultivating it and spreading it. A strategy that allowed cannabis to borrow our legs and piggyback on humans as we colonized the globe. Similar to cultivated fruits like the apple or even domesticated animals like the house cat, marijuana is part of the human shaping of the earth. That's a very amazing way to look at it, really. But we'll continue. We've no idea how long cannabis has been on the planet because it's a plant. It doesn't have fossils that we can go back and find. But the first humans' use appears about the same time agriculture was invented, making cannabis one of the oldest cultivated plants on Earth. In fact, cannabis may even be the catalyst for the discovery of farming and the basis for many old world civilizations, as astrophysicist Carl Sagan, who's a great man, mused back in 1977 in his book The Dragons of Eden. He said, "It would be really interesting if in human history the cultivation of marijuana led generally to the invention of agriculture and thereby society. With the discovery of the endocannabinoid system in the 1990s, which shows that humans have receptors not just in the brain, but throughout the body and even in the immune system that bind to the cannabinoids in marijuana. Sagan's conjecture is even more plausible. Among the pygmies of Africa, which are the closest living example of our Stone Age ancestors, cannabis remains the only cultivated crop, while the rest of their diet and resources that society needs are still foraged. Since agriculture leads directly to city building and advanced civilizations, this is strong evidence that cannabis is an emissary from the plant world that purposely created a mutually beneficial relationship with us in order to increase its own success, and has drastically changed or even launched human society in order to do so. While cannabis is dependent on us to spread it, it has also provided us with so many benefits that we are fully dependent on it as well. Now, it says fully dependent. I don't know if I agree with that. We've gotten on fine without it being legalized. Granted, I agree it would make things better, but as the Dalai Lama once said, interdependence is a fundamental law of nature. Fundamental. God. I've been talking for too long. But there's more. Right. We've talked about the benefits, the bad things, the co-evolution of marijuana and humans. But now I want to look into what actually happens in your brain. What does it actually do? Why do people like to do it? First off, we need to understand how the brain functions. If you want a more in-depth look, go back to Spark episode 1, where I talk about learning, and I go pretty in-depth about it for about half an hour. But if you've already listened, here's a quick recap. Your neurons are the cells that process information in the brain by releasing chemicals called neurotransmitters. From the axon of one neuron to the dendrite of another, they change the electrical charge of the receiving neuron, consequently exciting or inhibiting it. If it is excited, the signal passes on through. These signals work together, and the effect is quickly compounded into complex configurations within milliseconds, flushing over the entire brain. This is what happens every single time you think, breathe, or move. This constantly happens in your head. Your brain's just bang, 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 firing neurons constantly. You're listening to me, you're thinking about it, you're probably driving down the road, maybe you're drinking a cup of tea, maybe you're drinking a beer, maybe you're smoking a joint. This would be a great time to smoke a joint. And spark now. I just realized that's the name of my podcast. Oh god, I didn't mean it that way. It's not called Spark for that reason, right? Not at all. But so what's actually happening when you're on marijuana? As I said before, unlike alcohol, which contains molecules nothing like those in our body, cannabis contains molecules that resemble those produced in our very own brains, cannabinoids, which I've been talking about throughout the whole thing. Though naturally these cannabinoids circulate in much lower quantities compared to the large influx imposed by smoking. So when you smoke, you get a lot more than we already have. We don't have a lot going around us, but they're there. You can find them if you're looking. Specifically, THC resembles a natural transmitter in the brain that is released when neurons are firing. The neurons temporarily become unresponsive after firing to prevent them from overreacting or becoming too dominant. This allows your brain to function in a calm and controlled manner, but cannabinoids interrupt this approach in some parts of the brain. Instead, they remove the refractory period of neurons that are already active and cause your thoughts, imagination, and perception to utterly magnify itself. So once you begin a train of thought, it becomes the most significant and profound thing ever. You think you're a genius, but you can't see the big picture or even recall your last epiphany because you're caught up in the momentum of a particular idea, and your neurons keep firing until a new idea takes hold of you and you go off on another tangent and you just keep going. And like, if you're talking to other people who are also high, you can go down some very weird avenues, man. You can just disappear into the ether and just keep going and not come back. Interestingly enough, cannabinoids also affect the levels of dopamine and norepinephrine in your brain, and these are the chemicals that deal with your happiness. So it leads to a sense of euphoria, relaxation, pain modulation, and general enhancement of an experience. Although it does sometimes cause anxiety, as I've said before. So, take everything I say with a pinch of salt. Now, a lot of users of marijuana, particularly famous ones, are creative people. The question is, does marijuana boost creativity, or are creative people drawn to marijuana more than others? Now, a new study published in the Journal of Consciousness and Cognition suggests that creative people are drawn to more marijuana more than others. The results showed that pot smokers, who were sober at the time, outperformed non-smokers at one of the two tests researchers used to measure creativity. And that is the difference in creativity, and that the difference in creativity is most likely due to personality traits rather than the marijuana itself. The study worked like this. Researchers used the Big Five model of personality to measure the personality traits of 979 undergraduate students. I don't know what the Big Five model is. I'm just kind of going with them on this one. They then asked the group to self-report their own levels of creativity and also objectively measured creativity among the students using two separate tests. Two kinds of creative thought processes were measured to assess participants' level of creativity. The first one is divergent thinking. It's a thought process used to generate many possible solutions to a problem, like brainstorming. To measure divergent thinking, participants were asked to complete the alternate uses test, in which they had 1 minute to generate as many uses for a common object as they could imagine. Like, how many ways can you use a cup? You can think of a couple of ways, hopefully. The other thing they tested for was convergent thinking. It's the opposite. A thought process that involves judging a finite number of solutions to arrive at one correct answer, like a multiple choice test. To measure convergent thinking, participants completed a remote associates test, which consists of 3 unrelated stimulus words which are associated with a solution word. Someone's beeping their horn outside. You're ruining my podcast. Fuck you. You probably can't even hear it, actually. But anyway, they did a remote associates test, which consists of 3 unrelated stimulus words, which are associated with a solution word. That is really difficult to say. Consists of 3 unrelated stimulus words, which are associated with a solution word. There, I got it. For instance, the solution word for cottage, Swiss, and cheese. Fuck it, I gave it away. For instance, the solution word for cottage, Swiss, and cake would be cheese. See, I fucked that one. It would have been interesting if I said it right, but I fucked it up. Anyway, the results showed that while there was no significant difference between the two groups on the divergent thinking test, cannabis users outperformed non-users on the remote associates test that measured for convergent thinking. So cannabis users who weren't high at the time are better at convergent thinking. So they think that leads them to being more creative people without marijuana. Now, you could say that because they used marijuana, they remember their experiences and became more creative. That's anecdotally what's happening. That's what I've heard. If you ever listen to Joe Rogan's podcast, he's always harping on about it. That's how he writes. He'll start a joke. He's a comedian. Anyone who doesn't know Joe Rogan. He'll start writing a joke, and he'll do it sober, and then he'll smoke some marijuana, and then read it again, make adjustments, so it's funny while he's sober and funny while he's high, and he finds that gives him more creativity, gives him more of a perspective on the joke. Now, I'm not Joe Rogan, so I don't know exactly what he's talking about, but it seems to make sense to me, I guess. Anyway, that's all well and good, but it's still illegal in Ireland. Cannabis is illegal for recreational purposes. Use for medical purposes requires case-by-case approval by the Minister of Health. So it's very difficult to actually get a medical marijuana license. I don't know anyone, or I don't know of anyone who has one. A bill to legalise medical uses for cannabis passed second reading in Dáil Éireann in December 2016. It became illegal in the Irish Free State. They were first prohibited. Cannabis and cannabis resin were first prohibited by the Dangerous Drugs Act of 1934, which came into force on the 1st of April 1937. The 1934 Act replaced the Dangerous Drugs Act of 1920, which was a UK act passed before the Free State's creation, and fulfilled the state's obligations under the 1925 revision of the International Opium Convention, which had added Indian hemp to the list of controlled substances, and which was ratified by the Free State in 1931. No, the reason they updated the Dangerous Drugs Act of 1920 to the Dangerous Drugs Act of 1934 was because Ireland had gained its independence then, and we didn't want anything to do with the British at all. So we changed all their laws. Well, we changed the names of them slightly. And we used the same laws, but we call them Irish laws, and they're our laws. We changed a good bit of them, actually, but some of them are pretty much the same. We haven't changed a lot, but it's the principle that counts. Cannabis use increased in Ireland from the late 1960s. In 1968, the government set up a working party on drug abuse, whose 1971 report recommended keeping the legal and medical status of cannabis under review, and that possession of a small amount of cannabis for personal use could not be punished by imprisonment. The recommendation to place cannabis in a separate legal category from other narcotics was included in the Misuse of Drugs Act in 1977, which replaced the 1934 Act and remains in force. I believe marijuana is a Class C drug in Ireland. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. If you ever get arrested for it, it's only a Class C. How do you know that? Jack told me. Well, don't listen to me. I'm not a lawyer. A solicitor, sorry. We don't have lawyers in Ireland. Gardaí have a level of discretion when dealing with recreational cannabis users. To procure a conviction, any cannabis seized has to be sent for analysis to the Garda Forensics Science Lab. This, along with the time needed to process the arrest, means that the individual Garda may decide not to arrest for small amounts, but the drug will be seized and the name of the individual will be taken. Possession of cannabis is an arrestable offence, and in 2003, 53% of all drug seizures and 70% of all drug-related prosecutions were for cannabis. Trafficking of or possession with intent to supply are serious offences under Irish law. 75% of drug cases before the criminal courts in Ireland are for simple possession. This accounted for 11,486 of the convictions in 2016. On being brought to court, the penalties for possession are outlined as follows. For your first offence, on summary conviction, to a fine not exceeding €381, or on conviction on indictment, to a fine not exceeding €635. For a second offence, on summary conviction, to a fine not exceeding €508, or to a conviction on indictment, to a fine not exceeding €1,269. So your 50 bag may cost you a lot more than 50 quid. Third, or a subsequent offence, on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding €1,269, or at the discretion of the court, to imprisonment of a term not exceeding 12 months, or to both the fine and imprisonment, or on conviction on indictment, to a fine such amount as the court considers appropriate, or at the discretion of the court, to imprisonment of a term not exceeding 3 years, or to both the fine and imprisonment. There is no law against possession or sale of cannabis seeds. So, your third offence, you may have to pay a ridiculous amount of money and 3 years in prison. If you're caught 3 times, it can happen. It can happen. That's if you fuck up royally. I imagine if you're nice about it and you apologise a lot, you're probably going to get just the fine of €1,269, or less than 12 months. But I don't know. I'm not a solicitor, as I said. Anything could happen. Now, there are a few politicians who are advocating for the legalisation of marijuana. Luke Ming Flanagan is a long-standing pro-cannabis campaigner. He was elected to the Dáil in 2011 and as an independent Teachta Dála TD for Roscommon South Leitrim. On 6 November 2013, he proposed a motion that Dáil Éireann calls for the government to introduce legislation to regulate the cultivation, sale and possession of cannabis and cannabis products in Ireland, which was defeated by 111 votes to 8. Not good there. On 20th November 2013, he introduced a private member's bill, the Cannabis Regulation Bill 2013, which never got a second reading. So he tried, to be fair to him, but he didn't really get anywhere. In November 2015, Aidan O'Riordan, the Minister of State responsible for the national drug strategy, said he favoured decriminalising cannabis, cocaine and heroin for personal use. O'Riordan lost his seat in the 2016 election. Probably not a coincidence there, Aidan. Not a good move to, like, we'll start with one and then we'll move on. Just don't say cannabis, cocaine and heroin. Well, maybe we'll start with the cannabis and we'll move slowly forward. In December 2016, a private member's bill was introduced by Gino Kenny of People Before Profit to make cannabis available in Ireland for medicinal use. It passed second stage without a vote. The bill progressed to the amendment stage on 9th November 2017. One of the major organisations campaigning for the legalisation of cannabis is Normal Ireland. It's NORML. I don't know what that stands for. I went on the website. It doesn't say it anywhere that I could find. Normal Ireland supports the removal of all penalties for the private possession of cannabis by adults, cultivation for personal use, and the casual non-profit transfers of small amounts. Normal Ireland also supports the development of a legally controlled market for cannabis. In June 2018, after a bill was passed to legalise cannabis in Canada, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar has stated that the decriminalisation of cannabis was under consideration, with an expert group considering examining the systems in jurisdictions in which cannabis has been decriminalised for recreational use. So even our Taoiseach has kind of said, maybe we're going to legalise it, maybe we won't. But yeah, that's it. That's all my notes on it. This podcast was twice as long as a regular one, but I feel like it was something that I needed to discuss. I am planning on doing other drugs, like cocaine and heroin, maybe acid, LSD. You know, I just want to find out, like, why these exist and why people use them and why they're illegal. Psilocybin was going to be an interesting one. It was just legalized in Denver, which is kind of crazy. People now can take mushrooms if they want, which is fantastic. Probably. I don't know. I've never taken mushrooms. I don't know what it's like. But that's enough for marijuana. That's enough facts anyway. I'm just going to give my opinion now. I think that it's fine. You know, I have no strong feelings one way or another of what people put into their own bodies. It's their own damn business. As long as you're not hurting anyone else, I don't really give a fuck. As long as you don't drive while intoxicated, or if you don't fucking take a load of drugs and beat the shit out of people, you can do whatever the fuck you want to do, man. Just you be you, I'll be me. That's fine. So I have no problem with marijuana being legalized at all. It helps a lot of people. It fucks up a lot of people. I know people who are dependent on it. I know people who have gone way better lives because of it. I've heard plenty of anecdotal evidence of its treatment for epilepsy in particular. People who can feel their seizures coming on can just have a smoke, chill out, relax. And I don't know what it does to the brain, but it seems to relax it, and the wave of the seizure just passes, and they can get on with their lives. They can continue to function as normal people. Not that they're not normal people anyway, but you know what I mean. It takes a lot of pressure off. People do get dependent on it though, and it does ruin families, mostly because it's criminal. People get arrested for it. As I said, you can be in jail for 3 years for your third offence of possession. That's not even selling it. And the only way to acquire it now is to go to the black market and buy it off drug dealers who are shady as fuck. It's not a good thing. I feel like if we legalized it, we could tax it, make some money, see what's happening in America at the moment. Denver, Colorado in general has made millions from tax from it. California has made a lot of money from it. All of America, I think, has made a lot of money from it. If you want to go back in time, not even back in time, but just look at the Netherlands. In Amsterdam, it's been legal since before I was born. I don't even know how long it's been legal, and nobody has a problem with it. It's just like, they're the stoners. Fucking, they're fine, you know. They're not going around murdering people. Not that I don't think they'd be able to, you know. My argument is alcohol, basically. You know, alcohol is legal, and alcohol kills people every fucking day. People drunk drive. People can just drink themselves to death. If you go down to the shop, you can buy a full bottle of whiskey. If you down that and you're a small person, you're not used to drinking, you're probably going to die. You know, it's not a good thing. It's really bad for you. It fucks up your heart, fucks up your liver, fucks up your kidneys, fucks up everything. It's poison. Don't get me wrong. I love alcohol. I enjoy a beer. I love whiskey, and Guinness is probably the greatest thing that's ever been invented. But it is terrible for you. It's awful. We have entire buildings dedicated to selling alcohol to people. Isn't that crazy? That we choose our drugs. Like, this one's fine. Everyone can have this. Like, I have a beer bottle in front of me right now. I'm looking right at it. I enjoyed it. I enjoy my beer. It's relaxing. Why can I have beer when I can't have marijuana? It's obviously, if it was as bad, you know, I probably wouldn't want it. I think it's better for you than alcohol is. You know, I've never seen a man have way too much marijuana and start beating the shit out of people. I've seen a lot of people have way too much alcohol and start beating the shit out of people. You know, it makes you aggressive, or it makes aggressive people have less inhibitions, but it doesn't slow them down enough. If you have way too much marijuana, you're not doing anything. You're not attacking anybody. You can barely attack a sandwich. You fuck up and eat too many sandwiches. That's the worst thing that happens. You know, it's not a big problem that our society has. I think it's a lead over from the old 1930s ads of reefer madness, and it's the devil's weed and the devil's lettuce, and it's going to fuck up your kids, and it's going to teach them desire and lust and all the things that we really like now, but were bad in the 1930s. And it's just nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. It's a fucking plant. It developed along with us. It gives us advantages, I want to say. It helps us think of things in different ways. It has literally coexisted with us since agriculture began. There's an argument to say that it actually helped us start societies in general, and, you know, we're literally built so that we can accept it. We have cannabinoid receptors in our bodies to accept it. We don't have alcohol receptors in our bodies. That's what kills us. You know, I like it. It's fun. I like the idea of it. It would be a lot more. I think that nights out in town would be a lot more fun if people could go to smokehouses rather than a pub. If you had the option, probably going to like a nice chill vibe area, not with a lot of like half naked young ones just clawing each other's eyes out and smacking each other with handbags. Then the young men full of testosterone and full of alcohol beating the shit out of each other. I just think it would be we'd live in a nicer world if marijuana was legalized. And hopefully it will be. People are making efforts. That's good. Leo Varadkar has led us into, not that I think he's I don't think of him at all really, but he's led us through a lot of progression recently enough with the whole gay marriage thing and the abortion bill. Maybe marijuana is the next thing. I hope it is. I'd like to see us vote on it. I know all the young people would vote for it. Maybe we'll have a whole Brexit situation where we'll divide the country into old people and young people, and maybe the old people will vote for it too. I don't know. I'd like to find out though. I'd like to give it a chance, just to see what happens. But I've been rambling on for an hour and 5 minutes now, so I think it's time to stop. I want to thank you all for listening. Hopefully you learned something today. That's the whole point of this show. And I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.